Romeo and Juliet Code, Chapter 41. I will be 12 years old in 3 months, which makes me 11 3/4. I have been in Bottle Bay now for 6 months since May, and in those 6 months I think I have grown 5 inches. Derek said I was a mere pipsqueak when he first saw me, and it feels like ages since I had a birthday. We were still in London when I turned 11. I thought because of the war I wouldn't have a proper birthday, but Winnie had been saving a secret stash of sugar and flour, and she made a little birthday cake for me. She woke me up singing "Happy Birthday" and brought me the cake with a candle burning on it while I was still half asleep. When I got up, we made short work of that cake, and it was a lovely one too. Winnie knew how to make little blue roses out of icing, and she put them around the edge of the cake. In another life, she always said, I will be a baker, and I will have a shop full of beautiful rose-covered cakes. Danny was smiling at her with great admiration, but at the same time he looked a bit sad. There was a photograph back in London, in our flat, that shows Winnie and Danny and me with the lovely birthday cake. Alice Wentley took the picture. She said it was the last time she would come into London, and that's when Danny said, "Oh, we'll be leaving soon anyway." And he put one arm around Winnie and the other around me and smiled. Alice Wentley took another photograph. Then Winnie said, go get one of my hats and put it on, and we'll do a birthday photograph of you wearing a big birthday hat. And so I did. I went in their bedroom and looked about, and then I opened the cupboard door and started rummaging a bit, looking for a hat which I found. And while I was in the cupboard, I saw a man's overcoat hanging there in the darkness. I hadn't noticed it before, and when I opened the front of the coat, I saw it had a French label. For some reason, that made me look in the inner pocket. Then I pulled my hand back quickly, because there was a gun in there. It was small, but very different from a toy gun, in that it was very heavy. And when I let go of it, it dropped back down deep into the pocket. Ooh, thanks. I went on to sing another round of Happy Birthday with Winnie and Danny and Alice Wentley in the kitchen. And later, when I thought about it, I tried to remember what I had really seen, and I wondered if perhaps it had just been a dream. Chapter 42. That autumn in Maine, the USS Denobula arrived at Casco Bay. We read about it in the Portland papers. It was a great big tanker that was sent here to service the whole fleet of U.S. destroyers that would leave from Portland Harbor to escort the cargo ships crossing the ocean to bring supplies to England. President Roosevelt had decided finally to protect and accompany the cargo ships with American destroyers because the Nazis had been sinking hundreds of cargo vessels as they crossed the ocean. They were trying to cut off the food and fuel supply to England. Sometimes we could see a fleet passing along the horizon, one cargo ship with a group of big U.S. destroyers surrounding her. Derek and I loved to watch them through our binoculars. Uncle Gideon, too, would come out on the porch and stand there with us, waving to them. He said without those cargo ships, England would starve. Derek said that he had seen the cruiser ship, the USS Augusta, going by with 7 destroyers protecting her. Oh. That was back in August. That was the ship that was supposed to have been carrying President Roosevelt back from his secret meeting with Mr. Winston Churchill. Derek said the ship he saw was flying a blue flag with 4 stars, which meant there was an admiral on board. 4 stars. Wow, at that time, he didn't know that President Roosevelt might also have been on board. A few days later, Roosevelt was spotted in Rockland, Maine, and that's when everyone figured it out. Still, no one knew where the secret meeting had taken place. Oh, I wish I had seen the USS Augusta go by that day. But I was out in the salt marsh with Auntie Miami sketching. For that whole autumn, Derek and I kept on waiting for Uncle Gideon to go back with his folder to Peace Island. But so far, he hadn't gone at all. Both he and I continued to wait for a letter from Europe, but no letter came. and Uncle Gideon seemed quieter than usual, and more than once he stopped me on the porch or in the kitchen to ask if I hadn't seen a letter or misplaced a letter. I always had to say no. One Saturday after breakfast, the mail was delivered by the weekend postman, an older gentleman who moved quite slowly and sometimes mixed up the mail, and gave us letters belonging to the White Whale Inn down the beach. I fetched the mail that day, and there was nothing much there, just a newspaper or two. I could see Uncle Gideon looking out through the lace curtains in the dining room, watching and waiting. After that, he seemed rather cross, which was not his usual way at all. Then just about mid-morning, all of a sudden, he set off down the beach anyway, with his folder under his arm. He didn't walk as briskly as he had earlier, and he seemed to be looking for an answer in the sand beneath his feet. I wonder where he's going. Chapter 43. Derek and I rang up Mr. Henley immediately. Thank goodness he had a telephone, as a lot of people along the coast did not. It was a brooding, windy day, actually not exactly rainy, but the sky was almost without color. A lot of the trees above the shore no longer had leaves, or if they did, they were raggedy and wind-torn and brown. When we reached Mr. Henley on the telephone, he told us he would like to check his lobster traps and that it would be good to get out on the water. We were to meet him at the dock in front of the White Whale Inn, which was way down the beach to the north of our house. The White Whale Inn was closed now since the season was over, and all the windows and doors were boarded and shuttered up like everything else out here, but the dock was still in use. Derek and I arrived early at the dock, and while we were waiting, I looked up at the large weather-worn inn. It seemed completely deserted. I quite hoped that Mr. Churchill and Mr. Roosevelt had come here for their secret meeting in August. When the hotel had been open, I tried to imagine them sitting out there in the wicker chairs, talking about the war. Do you think they came here for their secret meeting? I called to Derek. No, silly, he shouted back. They went up to Newfoundland. Everyone knows that now. Still, it would have been a perfect place, don't you think? I cried out into the roar of the ocean. And it would have been lovely to have them so nearby. Just then, we saw Mr. Henley's small lobster boat coming round the bend, and we ran down to the dock and waved. And when he came up and shut off his motor, we climbed in. Derek put a life jacket on me. He tucked it right over my head and showed me where to buckle it. And all the while I was looking into his face and thinking that he was ever so knowledgeable. Mr. Henley asked right away about our secret report on the great blue heron. But aren't they gone by now, migrated south, or do they stay behind all winter? He said, starting up the motor again. I stared blankly at Mr. Henley. Well, actually, great blue herons decide at the last minute. That's why they stand on one leg. They are deciding about migrating. Should we go or should we stay? That sort of thing. Our secret report will cover all that, said Derek, nudging me with his good elbow. The boat was cutting through the water now, and I was looking down into the depths of the ocean for seals. In the summer, you often saw them sunning on the rocks. We putted along through the waves, the shore and the rocky cliffs passing by above us. We saw the Bathburn house, then from a distance, with its widow's walk and the tower room at the top of the sky, the whole place seemed wrapped in isolated autumn silence. Derek said, I heard there was some waiter at the White Whale Inn this summer who took off during his shift and cut all the telephone wires to the inn. He was unstable, said Mr. Henley. He just up and left. No one knows where he went. I guess the police were looking for him because the guy had a bunch of Nazi flags in his room. And they say we are teetering on the brink of war, said Derek. Yes, they do say that, said Mr. Henley. Any day now, I'm guessing, any day now. A sea so gray, I woke all night, and rose at dawn to find dark light. Like poetry. Usually, I said. You seem very different to me without your postman's suit on. I almost didn't recognize you. You look like a true fisherman. Ah, said Mr. Henley, all the world's a stage, and all men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. William Shakespeare, he was a great poet and a true visionary. Mr. William Shakespeare, I said, isn't that the chap who wrote the play Romeo and Juliet? Indeed it is. The greatest playwright ever. Shakespeare? Derek said. Would you say that you enjoy his plays? I would, said Mr. Henley. I'm not just a mailman or a fisherman. I also write and read poetry. I send my poems to the Saturday Evening Post, hoping to get published. But they always send them back to me saying, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. Well, it's their loss, Mr. Henley, I'm sure, I said. Yes, he said. So, I added, did I hear you say you favor this Mr. Shakespeare? Yes, I most certainly do, said Mr. Henley. As a matter of, as a reader and a writer, I most certainly favor Shakespeare. Derek and I looked at each other, straight on. Our eyes snapped tight, and we both nearly jumped up out of the boat and leaped into the tossing sky. But we were nearing Peace Island. It loomed before us, and thousands of birds, whole clouds of them. They were calling and crying and fluttering against the rocky cliffs that seemed to just straight up from the sea. Interesting that he likes Romeo and Juliet and Shakespeare, huh? Chapter 44. I followed Derek as he climbed the steep path that zigzagged up the side of Peace Island. There were wild, scruffy, autumn-colored rose bushes on either side of the narrow way. I could look straight down and see the now green, deep water far below us. Seabirds like puffins and storm petrels and terns and seagulls hovered and landed on the cliffs above us. I could see Mr. Henley and his small blue lobster boat moving out towards the open sea. I rather wished he would have stayed closer by. The wind was picking up. It was almost howling, like a choir singing in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I kept hearing the Graham in my mind saying, "Stay off those rocky bluffs to the south of here, Flissy. The wind gets ferocious over there, and a little stick of a girl like you could be swept out to sea in a snap." When we had climbed all the way to the top cliff, where the island then flattened out into a long wavering grass, we could look off into the distance and see Mr. Henley's boat getting smaller and smaller. "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" I called out to the wind, and Derek said, "Shh, we're not alone on this island, remember? But you're right, he is our Romeo. Why didn't we ask him outright, Flissy? We should have." "No," I said, "we can't risk it. If we ask him outright, he might say, 'Oh no, I'm way too busy.' We really must be terribly clever about this, don't you think?" I looked off one more time at the sea, stretching away into forever. Mr. Henley's boat was fast becoming a blue speck on the horizon. What if he forgot to come back for us? What if a stray Nazi U-boat prowling about the coast came about Mr. Henley's little lobster boat? Seabirds still circled overhead, and the long switch grass rolled and rippled and simmered like water. "Come on," said Derek. "Hurry. We don't know how long Gideon will be out here. Let's head to Savage Point." "Savage Point?" I said. "Yep. It's named after a hermit who used to live out there. He took care of the lighthouse. His name was Joe Savage. People in town used to say Joe Savage took a bath once a year, even when he didn't need one." Derek smiled up and out of all that was before us. "There's the lighthouse," I said. "It's not in use anymore since they built a new one over on Turtleback Island. The Savage Point Lighthouse is pretty much abandoned." The wind was behind us, and it felt as if we blew through the wide field of grass, as if we were flying across the open stretch, as if the clouds were piling up higher and higher above us, as if the dark trees against the sky were ripping back and forth faster and faster. Derek got ahead of me, and I had to call out to him to slow down, but my voice seemed lost in the wind. Finally, we came to a wooded, sheltered area. We slid down a steep slope into a rocky, bushy glen, and then we went through a group of trees that were short and bent over, as if they had been standing up too long against the weather. Just on the other side of the trees, there it was, the Savage Point Lighthouse, sitting high up on the farthest and outermost spot on the island, the final piece of land before the vast open Atlantic. We came upon it slowly, although the wind seemed almost to push us along. The lighthouse was gray, a forlorn, bitter gray. Its windows were broken. The door hung open on loosened hinges. A rope was strung across the path, and there was a sign, hung on it that said, "Danger, no trespassing." As we got closer, we began to hear a noise like a small motorboat coming from inside the lighthouse. I looked out at the ocean and could see nothing but the endless water with no sign of Mr. Henley. Derek stepped over the rope and moved towards the half-open door. He took my hand in his, and suddenly, though I was scared, my hand felt tingly and warm lying in Derek's hand, almost as if I could feel all of Derek's being in his palm pressed close to my palm. I followed him through the door. Nothing between our palms, just his against mine. Inside, light came down in shafts through broken windows from above. Old plaster lay on the steps that curved round and up, to the top of the lighthouse. Palm against palm, I followed Derek. The noise was a kind of even hum now. Up the steps and round the first turn, we looked out a broken window straight down into a drop-off to the sea below. Round the next curve, there was more plaster, an old pair of boots set off to the side, a bird nest above a broken window, hay and bird droppings, and the low drone of a motor as we rounded up and up. Then at the top, there was a green wooden door, mostly closed, only a crack left open. Derek, still holding my hand, leaned closer as we both peered through the crack. Uncle Gideon was sitting at a table, his back to us. On the table was a machine connected by a wire to a small motor on the floor. Uncle Gideon was tapping out something on the machine. Even over the motor, we could hear tap, 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 tap. I wonder what that is, guys. Actually, I think it's a Morse code machine. Well, I'm going to stop right now, and we will read on chapter 45 after I post this. A Morse code machine. I wonder what that could be. Bye for now.